I was a civilian employee at the UK Ministry of Defence for 21 years. And the Ministry of Defence is it's the British equivalent of the DOD. And at exactly the point I was due for a move, the vacancy on the so-called UFO desk came up. And so I was asked if I wanted to do this as my next posting. And I spent 3 years doing that officially for the government. And our job there was to basically to investigate the 200 or 300 cases we got each year, to research the phenomenon more generally, and to come to an assessment about the potential defense and national security implications of what we were dealing with.
So what were the main years, would you say, that you were focused on that aspect of your career?
It was 1991 to 1994. I was involved in 1993 in the work that led to this being set up, Project Condign. And what our thinking was that we had, over the years, just approached all of this on a very case-by-case basis. So, you would go in each week and you'd have a few dozen sightings reported, and you'd look at each one. But no one had ever said, well, look, let's take a step back and let's do a proper intelligence assessment on UAP. When you investigate a sighting, the first thing you do is you interview the witness. But a lot of that was just done over the phone. And people say boots on the ground, thinking it's like the X-Files. Well, it's not quite like that. The boots on the ground is more radar. It's more about intelligence community imagery analysis, resources and capabilities. It's more about satellites, forward-looking infrared cameras, like we've all seen in recent years, of course, these US Navy videos, the Tic Tac incident, Go Fast, and those sorts of things. And it's also about what we call MASINT, which is measurement and signature intelligence. And again, it's all quite highly technical and scientific. And so, I'm a great fan of the X-Files. And like you mentioned in the intro, I have been called the real life Fox Mulder, but real life government UAP work isn't kind of running around dark warehouses. When I was doing this job from 1991 to 1994, Britain didn't even have a Freedom of Information Act. So, we really, that was good news, great news for me, because I could get on with the job. But my successors got bogged down once Britain had a Freedom of Information Act. People sent more FOI requests to the Ministry of Defense on UFOs than they did about the Iraq War.
Wow.
So yeah, you're absolutely right that I was doing this job in a totally different era. The skill that we didn't have, which I think would have been very useful and is often overlooked in UAP research, even to this day, with the Pentagon doing it in Arrow. But the skill set I would want is a psychologist, because, you can look at the phenomenon, but you can't look at it in isolation of the witnesses. How is it that people perceive things in different ways? So I think a psychologist would be a very interesting person to have on a UAP.
So you're saying on a day-to-day basis, it was more like going through the witness reports, reading the technical specs on a camera, and checking weather reports on sightings and things like that. That's more of what you did than going out in the field and, there's an imprint here. Let's take some radiation readings, that kind of thing.
Yeah. Now, we did take radiation readings, or rather my predecessors did, with the Rendlesham Forest case, of course. Yeah. But that's because that was a landing. And self-evidently, if you have a landing, you have a landing site that can be forensicated. But you've got to think, you go through the Ministry of Defense UFO files, you go through the Blue Book archives, the number of the percentage of these cases that actually involve a landing is minuscule. I mean, in the US, of course, I guess you'd have something like the Lonnie Zamora case. You'd have, it wasn't a landing, but
the Thom Reed, the Thom Reed case.
I was not going to be so arrogant to talk about your case, because I'm going to let you do that. But obviously.
And just to follow up real quick, I know you can't talk about things that are still classified, but were there any other cases while you were there after Rendlesham that were similar to that?
The two other cases, not quite as big as Rendlesham, but they're probably in what the Ministry of Defense would call its crown jewels of UAP cases, are, of course, the Calvine incident and the Cosford incident. Cosford incident was March 1993, and the file has been declassified and people can read it. Those were big cases. There was another case involving the Channel Islands, not the Channel Islands off the coast of California, the English Channel. There was a commercial pilot called Ray Bowyer, who encountered a very spectacular UAP that was simultaneously tracked on radar. That was, I think, 2007, as I recall.
Well, I had a question about how did you determine like what sightings were worth investigating further?
You do a speed read, you see what you've got. People move all the time. You get someone who lives, in a location where they don't see that sort of thing, and then they move to near where there's a military base or a commercial airport, and you get literally cases like that. So you can triage them and say this needs about like 30 seconds of investigation. When we got media questions about this, it was very much official Ministry of Defense policy to downplay the true extent of our interest in all this, our involvement in all this, and to downplay the subject itself. And very often to do that, the best way to do it would be to throw the witnesses under the bus. The way we would do it is that we would insert into the conversation with the media, because they obviously wanted a line from us. And we would make sure that we would use phrases like flying saucers. So we would say, well, I'm sure that Mr. Smith is entirely sincere when he says that he's seen a flying saucer. And indeed, if he claims that he's contacted little green men.
Almost like you're talking about a child that had saw the monster under the bed. And it's like, I'm sure little Tommy is being very honest when he says there's a monster under the bed.
That's exactly it. That's exactly it. Yes.
Would you be able to describe any of the trends that you notice among these witnesses?
If somebody has had a high strangeness UAP encounter, they may well have had all things that you might term more paranormal phenomena. Obviously, and I'm not an expert in this, but people that specialize in abduction accounts have put it out there that there seem to be more people with rhesus negative blood.
RH negative is a big thing. I'm RH negative, but they haven't come and got me yet that I know of. So.
Well, Mike, you're what's known in the terms as a throwback.
Not nice.
From belief to skepticism, how has it changed or evolved from the minute you started your job to now where you are?
I think I'm much more discerning now than I was, say, 5 or 10 years ago. But again, I try not to be too fixed in my views. I try to take a very data-led approach to all this, and I try and come to each case or each idea with an open mind and just see what falls out.
Okay. And what do you think influenced you to dial back the belief to I guess more healthy, moderate skepticism, I call it that, in the past 5 or 10 years? Anything that influenced that you can disclose?
The whole narrative was getting out of control, and particularly at the New Age end of the spectrum, There was such a lot of kind of channeled information, and such a lot of, the aliens are here to invite us into the Galactic Federation and raise our vibrational levels, and I'm not disparaging the entire field, but on occasion it just sounded to me, firstly, you could go into some of these sessions and you could play buzzword bingo. You could go in with a blank sheet of paper and have written up things like higher frequency, higher vibrational level, Galactic Federation of Light, and you could tick them off one by one, and you knew what was coming. And when you can do that, it just makes you suspect that a lot of this is just almost scripted. It's all humanity must learn to raise its vibrational state so that you can enter into the light and pure love. And when you've done that, you'll be given a seat at the table of the Galactic Federation.
But that is true. I mean, I think when I did a show for Animal Planet, Uncovering Aliens, there was a segment that we cut out because, I had Daryl Sims working with me and some other people, and I was the group skeptic of the show. And there's this one guy in Jersey, and we interviewed him, and it became really obvious already stuff that had been told in a million other abduction stories. And there was like no, when I interviewed Thom for the show, Ancient Aliens, as we got closer to where his event took place, Thom got more and more tense. He got, it was pretty clear to me that there was this emotional reaction, whereas this other guy, it was like he was just sort of reciting lines. And it seems to me that if you were really in communication with a non-human intelligence, that what you got back would be so weird and so out of our way of thinking that it would be that, there would be a signature there. That's why I kind of tend to think that Whitley Strieber, is more genuine than a lot of people think, because his encounters are so bizarre. It's like, what kind of a human mind would come up with an experience like that?
I think one of the exciting things about this new administration is that we, of course, now have the task force on the declassification of federal secrets. Their next thing is going to be UAP. Now, there's going to be a lot of overlap between that and existing congressional interest, particularly from the House Oversight Committee, because a lot of people on the task force also sit on that House Oversight Committee. But it's an exciting time for this subject, to be sure. And there are going to be more public hearings, absolutely. And there are going to be some more whistleblowers coming forward. In a universe nearly 14 billion years old, there could be civilizations that got going a billion years before us, and therefore have a billion years head start on us. And to quote Arthur C. Clarke, their technology would be indistinguishable from magic. We are going to have nothing, zero, to tell them about science or technology or anything like that. Newly emerging civilizations like us might be the last interesting thing in the universe, because they'll have discovered and invented just about everything else.
Let me ask you this. Do you think that we are, or they are, our ancestors in any way?
I don't know. I mean, obviously there are people who believe that our evolution was tweaked. When UAP changed from unidentified aerial phenomena to unidentified anomalous phenomenon, the reason for that change was to sweep up these USOs. And the new task force, for example, when Anna Paulina Luna did the press briefing to announce its creation, the fact that she specifically said, not UAP, but she said UAP and USOs, I think that was telling.
So do you believe like the public is truly ready for the truth, whatever
No.
that may be?
No.
Did you guys ever hear or read or understand the Brookings Report? Or did it ever, was there a British equivalent to that in your system?
I was aware of that report when I was doing the UAP job. More recently, just in the last couple of years, the Department for Science, Innovation and Technology were going to do a study to assess how the discovery of extraterrestrial life might be announced to the public and what the societal reaction to that might be. But when the intention to do that study became public knowledge, I think they got cold feet and pulled the plug on it. Now, about 15 years ago, the Royal Society held 2 discussion meetings: the detection of extraterrestrial life and the consequences for science and society. The second one was called Towards a Societal Agenda on Extraterrestrial Life. And these were, and I attended both, these were multidisciplinary meetings where you had astrophysicists and astronomers and cosmologists, but you also had theologians, anthropologists, and psychologists. So that's the way that things should be done.
Okay, so you were aware of the Brookings report. Did you agree with its statements on those particular subjects, or it sounds almost like you still agree with them today? That we're not really ready.
I think disclosure might come with a dark side. What I term a secret too terrible to be told. And if you have a secret too terrible to be told, don't tell it.
Yeah.
Because look, if disclosure was easy, we'd have done it by now, right?
Yep. Agree. Yeah. Absolutely.
If this does become a controlled release, which it looks like it's going to be, there'll be no more Nick Pope. There'll be no more Mike Barrs. There'll be no more Thom Reeds. There'll be no more, right? Because they'll take over. They'll control it. So, right? There's something.
Well, that's the danger. That's the danger of government being in charge of
it. You know, then I'll retire and I'll say, good, job done. Controlled disclosure. Controlled disclosure looks like this. You know, rumors begin to circulate that something big is happening. TV kind of clears its schedule. And one evening, 6 p.m., you see the president in the Oval Office. My fellow Americans, people of the world, we are not alone. Of course, it will be a little stylized. Of course, it's a big, beautiful disclosure. Well, here's the flip side. The flip side of controlled disclosure is, of course, catastrophic disclosure. And I'm sure you've all heard that phrase.
Yeah,
and that
catastrophic disclosure.
Catastrophic disclosure is the idea that the plan goes off the rails and it all suddenly comes out at once, maybe from a kind of rogue whistleblower, but more likely from an adversary like Russia or China that then use that to try and leverage geopolitical advantage out of it.
Okay.
Some people think that there's like an international agreement amongst all governments that you don't put this stuff out, that either the United States leads the way or you simply do not talk about what you know about this. Do you think that's legitimately
right? That's actually my father had those documents from the UN. It's called GA 33426, and it was discussed with Mohammed Ramadan, the president of the Parapsychology Society, with Linda Morton Howe, Stanton Friedman, and my father's lawyer back in 1992. Absolutely right.
So do you think that there is that background agreement that we just aren't? And no, in other words, Russia's not going to get back at us for sanctions by telling the whole world there's aliens?
Well, every now and then somebody does try and do something with the United Nations with this, and there may or may not be agreements. I think there's always, if that were true, the danger is always that some rogue nation, some little nation that just doesn't give a damn, thinks this is my chance. Until these things get kind of adopted formally by the UN Security Council and signed up to by everything, it's not going to happen. You know, we didn't invent the term UAP, but we resurrected it to reframe the language about this. I
thought you came up with that. Is that not true?
No, it dates back. I think there's a document as old as 1948 or 1949, and it's a US document.
Wow.
But it had completely fallen out of use. In 1992 and 1993, myself and a colleague in defense intelligence in Britain, we deliberately replaced UFO with UAP not with the public and the media, but in our internal policy discussions, so that we could rebrand this. And in June of 2011, I went to a meeting in DC where I briefed a number of kind of government, military, and intelligence community personnel about how we did it, why we did it, and what effect it had. And then, of course, when the New York Times broke the story of ATIP and the US Navy videos, somebody asked the Navy spokesperson, hey, what's with this UAP? And he said, well, we borrowed that from the Brits.
Is there one thing that people would understand about UFOs that gets rarely discussed?
I would say the fact that to be really of interest, something needs to be not only unidentified, because let's face it, all sorts of lights in the sky that you see in the distance are unidentified. It needs also at the same time to be anomalous. So in other words, just an unidentified light drifting along in the distance is really of little interest. But if it's anomalous, if it suddenly kind of does a right angle turn against the wind and accelerates to high max speed with no sonic boom. So I think people forget that UAP needs not only to be unidentified, but also to be anomalous in terms of speed, maneuver, acceleration, and all of that.
Were you able to identify any type of aircraft or types of UFO craft?
We did have plenty of cases that did fall into that category of being both unidentified and anomalous. And by the way, before anyone comments, yes, I know I forgot to turn my ring light on, so it's been getting progressively darker here.
Well, if you had to pick one case that people should study that you think is the most likely to convince them that there's a phenomenon here, what would it be?
It would be Rendlesham. I mean, I've written, of course, a 100,000 word book on it with one of the big 6 publishing companies. So
you're not biased.
Not biased at all.
Nick,
Nick, we missed you.